Chad, thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. And as you can see, I walked up carrying some notes. I put my notes together today so I won't mess up, okay? But thank you very much. And I am pleased to be with you this morning. Definitely pleased because I want to see what it's like to be a legend. Because in just one more year, I'm going to be eligible to sit among the living legends here on the university campus and so forth, and take that walk in Keenan Stadium on graduation day, which a lot of people tell me is one of the thrills of their life when they get to do that. I really am embarrassed, and I appreciate his reference to it. I really am embarrassed a lot of times when people refer to me as a legend. I wasn't much of a legend. I just sat there and told what, well, almost 900 football lettermen did over 40 years and what almost 200 basketball lettermen did over 40 years because, and I will say this, they helped Old Woody sound awfully good on a lot of Saturday afternoons and cold winter nights. Not to mention the coaches that I was fortunate enough to work with, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. I really believe that folks like you and the folks who comprise the living legends that are a big part of this campus on graduation weekend and another time or two during the year are really a special group of people. You graduated, some of you, I think this year that are about to be inducted into this group. You graduated at least 50 years ago from Carolina. And I think that many of you left Chapel Hills maybe well before that time. And I think that during that time, since you graduated and since you went off, and most of you successful people in pharmacy and pharmacists across the state and across the country, I think that you've helped Carolina to remain one of the leading public universities in the entire nation. As I told somebody one day that Silent Sam still hasn't fired that rifle, but if he could speak, I think he'd be the first to thank you for what has taken place on this campus. And I thank you for what you have meant to your university and to the people that you serve for the work that you've done in your respective business. When I was invited to come today, I was asked to maybe tell a few stories, and we'll get to that, some of the stories that maybe you can identify with simply because of the personalities involved. But one question I'm getting now, the first and foremost after being retired from the broadcast booth for a year, is how do you like retirement? And I tell them I don't have any idea how I like retirement because I feel like I'm semi-retired. The only thing I'm not doing is I'm not doing the games, and I don't have to do that preparation that I really became a prisoner to over the years, because when we moved to Chapel Hill permanently in 1984, I really was exposed to so much more stuff. By that I mean that so many things became accessible. I could go to football and basketball practices. I could see the coaches more than I did when I lived in Greensboro and Cary, and I could also see the players. And so I created a lot more stuff that I wanted to have in front of me during the broadcast of a game than maybe I would have otherwise. And it was such a help to me that every time I did a game, I felt like I had to have all of that in front of me. And the problem was, if good things happened, then I had to go and rework all of that stuff I had in front of me to sort of update it, if you will. The other question I get is when people, and I'm flattered by this, when they come up to me, and a couple of you have done this today, and tell me that you miss me. Well, I miss doing it. I miss doing the games. I do not miss one bit the preparation that I had to do. And people want to know, well, Woody, why did you decide to retire? Well, the main reason was certainly not because of what we were undergoing at that time with our football program and some of the problems that we had there, which were unfortunately started by some of our players who became a bit selfish and forgot the university and the team that they were representing, and they looked into it as far as themselves were concerned. I just didn't feel at the time like my preparation was what I wanted it to be. I felt some of this during the 2009 and 2010 season. But I thought, well, I'll work on the off season. I'll try to focus a little bit more. And things went pretty well throughout the next football season. But then toward the latter stages of the football season, particularly when we get into that overlap period, and I know it probably wears some of you out who are trying to follow the Tar Heels, when we got a basketball game on a Friday night and we got a football game on Saturday afternoon, and having to get ready for all of that. That's quite a load. That's one of the most mentally and physically straining things that I ever had to do. The other was the ACC tournament, because we tried to keep a tradition going by doing all of the games in the ACC tournament. And that's just, you feel like you want to go off somewhere and be by yourself for about a week after all of that's over. But I just decided that my presentation, when it started to sort of slacken off again, if I can use that expression, I just felt like, well, I'll share a quick story with you. K. Wood Ledford was the legendary broadcaster of the University of Kentucky football and basketball. And he became a good friend of mine, as did so many of the veteran announcers who had come before me. And I saw K. Wood at the NCAA tournament the year after he had retired from doing the Kentucky games. And as we shook hands and I congratulated him on his retirement, I said, K. Wood, couldn't you have gone another year or two because you'd had such a round number to your retirement? And he looked at me without a smile on his face, and he said, Woody, when it's time, you'll know. I had no idea at that time what he was talking about. But believe me, over those last 2 years of my career, I began to realize what he was trying to tell me, that maybe it was time. And I certainly didn't want to be carried kicking and screaming out of the broadcast booth. But so as my son told me, my oldest son, Wes, when I approached the boys at Christmas time about it, and we were down in Atlanta for Christmas visiting Wes and his family, and Taylor, our youngest, was there. And so we got out and rode around in the car to run some errands and so forth. And so I talked to them about it. And Wes made a very, very important comment. He said, Dad, you can go out under your terms. And so that's what it wound up being. And now I'm just happy that the athletic department, the Rams Club, and the Alumni Association are all working to keep me busy, because I want to tell you what, they're wearing me out. We just finished a Tar Heel tour recently, 9 different stops across the state and 1 stop in Greenville, South Carolina, taking Bubba Cunningham, our new athletic director, and Larry Fedora, our new football coach. Roy Williams was also there, as was Sylvia Hatchell a time or two, as well as Mike Fox, our baseball coach. And it was great to see these 2 new people who have become Tar Heels in the last few months. Bubba Cunningham, isn't that funny? The Masters has got a Bubba now. But, you know, we got our Bubba before that. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of jokes from the other schools about Carolina having a Bubba. But let me tell you one thing. He's been here about 6 months, and he's already made a positive impact, I think, on what our program is doing. And I can't wait for you to not only see his teams play, but I can't wait for you to get to become familiar with Larry Fedora. I've never met a man in that position who has as much energy as Larry Fedora does. Mac Brown was close, but I think Larry's got him beat a couple of times. And, of course, Larry jokingly says that he drinks 5 cans of Red Bull a day. He said the diet kind, of course. He said, but I drink 5 Red Bulls a day just to calm me down. And when you're around him and everything, you'll get a sense of that. As I said, I would think I would probably label my status as semi-retired. I have played a lot of golf. My handicap is not where I want it to be. As a matter of fact, I moved to the front tees when I turned the last page on the calendar last August. I'll turn another page this coming August. It's getting a little bit better, but it's doggone fun to go out there and work on it. But in the midst of my retirement, after I'd retired, one friend came up to me one day and said something about, there will be days that you enjoy, but there will also be days when you do things for which you have no explanation. I hadn't done many of those until one night last December. My wife and I were coming over to the Smith Center for the Appalachian State game. Remember, this is Appalachian State in Carolina. It's not Duke, Carolina. It's not NC State in Carolina and anything. So anyway, she has a gimpy knee and is going to have some surgery on it come early part of August. And so I tried to get her as close to the back door of the Smith Center as I possibly could. So I drove up and let her off, and then I went back to find the parking place that they had given me for last season. And so I got out of the car as I pulled into my parking space, and some friends were walking by. And they spoke, and I spoke back, and so we walked over to the Smith Center together and saw Carolina win the game over Jason Capel's team. He's now the head coach, a former Carolina player at Appalachian State. He didn't get quite the treatment that King Rice did when he came back with his Monmouth team, but nevertheless, it was Appalachian State. So after the game, we went out the back door of the Smith Center, and we're in the parking lot, the back parking lot, and I told Gene, I said, you wait right here, and I'll go get the car, and I'll come and pick you up. And about that time, a friend walked up, just as I was putting my hand into my right pocket to get my car keys. I didn't have any car keys. I had locked my keys in the car about 2 or 3 times already during that year, and I thought, oh, my goodness, I've done it again. And a friend came up about that time, and we visited shortly, and he said, what's the matter? I said, I think I've locked my keys in the car. He said, you sure you didn't lose them in your seat? I said, no, I don't think so. And he said, well, why don't I go look at your seat location and see what I can find there? I said, well, that'd be great. So he went off to do that, and I went up to the parking lot to see what the situation was with the car, where we're going to have to get a locksmith to get me in again or not. And it was really funny. I'm about as far from the car as I am from that post right there. And I saw the taillights on. I got a little bit closer, and I saw the headlights on. And then when I really got close, the car was running. The keys were in the car, and the car had been running the entire game. So those are one of the crazy things you do. But I will give you a little sidebar. Gene and I had gone to a Christmas party the night before, and we came back. My fuel light came on my dashboard. And I said, well, I've got some work to do here tomorrow. And I said, I'll run out sometime during the day, and I'll get some gas. Well, I never did that. So we left to go to the Smith Center that night for the game. I said, well, you know, I think we've got enough to get over there and back, but maybe I should stop. Maybe it'd be best if I stop up here at the corner convenience store and at least get some to cover the bottom of the tank anyway. If I hadn't gotten that gas, we'd had to get one of those computerized trucks to come over and get that car started. So that was the one thing I did in 2011 for which I have no explanation. Folks, when I started doing Carolina basketball, it was not my Carolina football and basketball, it was not my long-range goal. At the end of the 60s, I had done games for the late C.D. Chesley on the ACC television network with the likes of Jim Thacker and Bones McKinney and Bobby Roberts. And my long-range goal was I someday wanted to be the television voice of both ACC football and television and basketball on television. Never Bill Curry, the mouth of the South, who was then the voice of the Tar Heels, would ever retire. I thought he'd die before, you know, he gave up the games. But he suddenly agreed to take a new television job up at KDKA in Pittsburgh. So Homer Rice was the athletic director at the time, and I was working at Channel 2 in Greensboro, and Homer called me one day and said, Woody, how about coming down and having lunch with me tomorrow? I said, I want to talk to you about our radio network. Not about being the new announcer, but just about the radio network and which way, as an alumnus and somebody he had gotten to know since becoming AD, he thought I might have some suggestions on which way the network should proceed in finding somebody new to come in. I walked into his office the next day over in Carmichael Auditorium. He got up from behind his desk and stuck his hand out to shake my hand. He said, Woody, I learned something new about you yesterday. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, I learned you went to school here. I said, Homer, if I've been doing ACC basketball on television for 4 years and you didn't know yesterday I went to school here, man, I have done one heck of a job. And we had a big laugh over that. Well, we talked about it. He never formally offered me, even gave me any hint that the job would be available if I chose to try for it. But as I drove back to Greensboro that day, it became more and more of an interest to me. So I got home that night, and my wife has always had the capability of, the Ashworths will love this because they know Gene really well. She asked the best questions in situations like that of anybody I've ever heard. So we're sitting over dinner between my early and late television show, and I'm telling her about the day and so forth like this, and she makes the statement to it. She says, you know, I really believe that if you don't try for this the way you're talking, that you're going to look back on it at some point in your time with regret that you didn't try for it. So I got on the telephone, called Coach Smith and Coach Dooley. Both said they would give me their support if I tried to get it, and they did, and 5 weeks later, I had a job that changed the course of my life. It had not been my goal, as I indicated, but it was something that led me to be able to do something that I have really enjoyed. What a ride. 40 years, and as Chad said a moment ago when he was introducing me, over 1,800 Carolina football and basketball games. I went to 38 states and 5 foreign countries with Carolina. And it was remarkable to be in those locations and see how the response was to Carolina. Yes, some alumni were there when we got to a lot of these places, but a lot of times it were just people who had become fans of Carolina, and particularly the basketball program. I was on the road, however, 4 different years at Christmas. I missed watching our youngest son take his first steps, and 7 other times on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. And I will share one story with you that I thought was really indicative of what Carolina kind of meant. Was December of 1991. The Spanish Olympic coach, who was a great friend of Coach Smith, had arranged a couple of exhibition games on the Canary Islands. That's right, in the northwest corner of Africa, out to sea, but off the northwest corner of Africa. And so we flew there and played a couple of exhibition games, and then there was a young man by the name of Henrik Rodel on the team. Henrik had been a German exchange student in Chapel Hill, and he decided to stay here and go to school, and he was recruited by Coach Smith as a basketball player and turned out to be a pretty darn good one. Very, very good complimentary player to the guys he was with on the floor. And so we're going to take Henrik to his home area. He was from just outside Frankfurt, Germany. So on Christmas Day, we flew to Frankfurt, Germany from the Canary Islands. Had Christmas dinner together that night, and you've never seen a bunch of guys that were so homesick because they couldn't be home at Christmas. And so the next day was going to be a practice day before the game was played on the night of the 27th. And there was a Carolina alumnus who was the wing commander out at Rhein-Main Air Base, Colonel Don Streeter, now retired from the United States Air Force as a brigadier general. He had written the basketball office asking the team that if at any time on their trip to Germany, if they had need for a practice session, would they consider coming to the base gym? Well, I think Coach Smith had served there sometime when he was in the Air Force before becoming the assistant coach there and eventually working his way to Chapel Hill as under Coach McGuire before he became the head coach. So the morning of December the 26th, the team gets on the bus. We follow out in the car. We go through the gate. We get onto the air base, and we turn the corner going down to the base gym. Well, you could already see the people. There must have been 150 to 200 people out there. And they had their blue and white pom-poms. They were all wearing Carolina blue and that sort of thing, and the bus pulled up and the team got off, and you would have thought they were getting ready to play a game. The crowd cheered and everything. Coach Smith didn't normally allow people with whom he was not familiar to come in and watch his practice sessions, and this was going to be a hard practice of about 90 minutes. But he allowed those folks to come into the gym that morning. And so they did, and they treated it just like a game. Practice session, they'd see a player get a dunk, and they'd go crazy like it was a game-winning shot or something like that. For 90 minutes, they go up and down the floor. The game is over, the practice session is over, and Coach Smith calls the players to the center jump circle and says, guys, I don't normally ask you to do this, but I'm going to ask you to do something today. And I want you to stay here, and we're going to stay here until every picture is taken and every autograph is signed. And they did. You could see the spirits of those players lifted by this situation because they had brought Carolina to some people who weren't able to see it as much as they would like. Certainly they would listen to it. A lot of the games back then were carried on Armed Forces radio, not much overseas television at that point back in the early 90s. But it was a marvelous event, and there were several others like that. But that's the one that left an indelible impression in my memory because of the reaction of the people and then the reaction of the players when they saw what they meant to those people the day after Christmas. I work with 6 head football coaches, and as I said to you earlier, you're aware of the adversity the program has been through and some of it still going on. But I think Bubba Cunningham and Larry Fedora are the right people at the right time to get this thing straightened out. Somebody said, they asked Larry the other day, said, Coach said, is the team extremely disappointed because there's a bowl ban coming up for this season? He said, well, I don't think so. He said, I called them together after the sanctions were announced, and I said, if you had a good time in Shreveport, raise your hand. That's where they played the Independence Bowl, folks, and got beat by Missouri. So if you had a good time in Shreveport, raise your hand. He said not one player in the room raised his hand. He said, so I don't think they're going to miss anything other than a major bowl, at the end of the season. I was able to describe during my time in football 6 victories for Carolina football over top 10 opponents, and two of the most impressive was the 2001 game against Florida State. That game got postponed a couple of weeks on the schedule because of the tragedy up in New York with the World Trade Towers. And so Carolina had 2 weeks to get ready for the game. Florida State came in as the, I think, number 4 team in the country. Florida State had a 9-7 lead at halftime. The final score of the game was 41-9 in favor of Carolina. I mean, in the second half, when they get into the 30s, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, my goodness, they're going to score 50 points against this crowd. And Florida State, of course, had one of the nation's top football teams and went on that year to play in a very big bowl game. But that was one of the most impressive victories. The other one came in 2004. Some of you may have seen it on television. You may have heard it, or maybe you were there. Connor Barth kicked a field goal on the last play of the game to beat number 3 Miami 31-28 in Kenan Stadium. And so those two are the ones that really stand out. I worked with 4 head coaches in basketball, all of whom became National Coaches of the Year. And, of course, as you might imagine, it was really an honor to be with Coach Smith as long as I was. I had gotten to know him between my sophomore and junior years here at Carolina when he became the head coach. And a lot of people thought then we had de-emphasized basketball. Coach McGuire was leaving to go to the Philadelphia Warriors, and a lot of people didn't know Coach Smith because Coach McGuire cut such a swath. You know, when he walked into a room, everybody knew he was there and so forth, and they really didn't know who his assistant coaches were except maybe for Buck Freeman, who was his coach when he played at St. John's. But Coach Smith got it, and we had some problems in basketball then. Like he could play only a 17-game schedule his first year. And everybody knows what that turned out to be. But I was with the gentleman closely for 26 of his 36 years. Always a pregame interview, always with him postgame after the games were over. 859. He coached 1,133 games at Carolina, and I had the opportunity to broadcast 859 of them. And 688, by the way, of his 879 wins, which at the time was the most in the nation, most in the history of basketball, surpassing Adolph Rupp. Now, of course, he's been passed by Mike Krzyzewski, Bob Knight, and Jim Boeheim. But it's still, at that time, it was a remarkable record. It was not one he wanted to achieve. His former players encouraged him to do it. Coach, you need to do it for the right reasons. And so he did. But everybody knew who he was as a basketball coach, and a lot of people had an idea of who he was as a person. But I want to tell you one quick story about him. Game one day over in Carmichael Auditorium, I went to see him after his news conference was over, and there was a reporter standing there talking to him. And I was going to ask him a question about his television show, which we had to do that night. And I was close enough to hear what they were talking about. They were talking about the game. And the newspaper reporter said to him, he said, Coach, you remember that stretch you talked about a while ago? It's 5 to 3 minute mark. And he said, boy, that was certainly a critical period of time in getting this win today. And I heard Coach Smith say, no, it wasn't critical. It was important. Basketball games are important, some more important than the others. But let me tell you this. He said, life is critical. He said, my oldest daughter, Sharon, had an emergency tracheotomy when she was 12 years old. He said, that's critical. But basketball is not critical. And now every time I hear these reporters on television or somebody writes in the newspaper that something in a basketball or football game was critical, I think about what Coach Smith said because he put it in perspective. And I'll tell you one other quick story. Michael Jordan, everybody knows Michael. It irritates me sometimes that everybody now seems to think, particularly the young people, because they're familiar with Michael's pro career rather than his college career. The young people now think that Michael single-handedly won the 1982 national championship. Actually, the next to last shot that he made in that game was a tougher shot than the one he knocked in from 18 feet out on the left wing in order to provide Carolina with the winning margin. But they forget that, you know, at the power forward was James Worthy, who was much more mature as a young man and as a player than anybody else on that team. That was really James Worthy's team. He scored 28 points in that game and didn't get a single point the last 12 and a half minutes of the game. The other players at the center position was Sam Perkins. Sam was so good that everybody, if he didn't at least have double-figure points and rebounds every night, Sam had a bad game, according to the fans. Matt Doherty was a very giving player in that he sacrificed a lot of opportunities to score, to do what he needed to do as a player to complement those guys around him. Michael was the big guard, and, of course, Jimmy Black was the perfect point guard. Each one of those guys on that team fit perfectly into their position. Well, it's 1984, and Carolina's at College Park, Maryland, playing a game, and Carolina's got the game won, but Michael is still on the floor with some of the reserves in the game. And Michael intercepts a pass, and when he did, he intercepted the pass in the Maryland front court, and when he got the ball, he started like this, and when he did, he was sort of making a little bit of a turn going to the other end. Well, when the players on the bench saw him make that move, they all stood up. Watch the tape. You'll see him standing up as he starts going front court with the basketball. You still see the clip today on television promoting college basketball. He goes in, and he did the cuff dunk. He'd done it in practice. He had the ball like this, took it up off the dribble in this hand like this, and went like this and slammed it when he went through. I'm sure many of you have seen it on television. We got back the next day, and we're working on the game highlights. And somebody comes into the tape room and asks me, tells me, said, what do you call? Said, the basketball office is on the line. So I went over and picked up the phone. It was Linda Woods, Coach's secretary. And we chatted for a few minutes about what a great win it had been the night before at Maryland. She said, Woody said, Coach needs to talk to you. So he got on the phone. How are you today? I said, fine. How are you doing, Coach? I said, great win last night. He said, yeah, it was a good one, wasn't it? He said, you working on the highlights? And I said, yes, sir, Coach, we just started. He said, I want you to do me a favor. I said, what's that? He said, don't put Michael's play, that dunk, at the end of the game in the highlights. I said, Coach, that highlight has been on every sports show in America and maybe halfway around the world since last night. He said, this is my television show, isn't it, Woody? And I said, yes, sir, it is. He said, I want you to take it out. And I said, can you tell me why? He said, I don't want Maryland to think we were rubbing it in. Everybody gets to see it even to this day, but that's the way he felt about it. And I think those two really kind of tell you what kind of man he was, and that we were fortunate enough to be around. His teams went to 11 Final Fours. They won 2 national championships, and they'd been to 6 before winning in '82. And there was a great deal of similarity between he and Roy Williams, because in '82, all the national media folks were saying, well, he's a pretty good coach, but he's not a great one because he can't win the big one. They have no idea how much effort it takes to win the big ones to get to the national championship or the Final Four. And Roy went through the same thing in his situation. He'd been to 4 Final Fours before his teams won in 2005 and again in 2009. 1982 and 2005 were relief for both of those fellows because they've been through the same sort of national criticism, if you will, and can call it that. And then 1993 and 2009 were just reasons for celebration because they are 2 of only 13 coaches in the history of the NCAA tournament who've won more than 1 national championship. And, of course, there are a lot of awfully good coaches down through the years who've never had the opportunity, 1, to win a national championship, and 2, to even get their teams to a Final Four. So that's how difficult it is. I learned a couple of things from all my work over those 40 years with Carolina football and basketball. One was the importance of preparation. I talked about my desire to be as prepared as I could be. And I heard one coach one day say that the will to prepare is more important than the will to win. Because if you're prepared, if you've got the willingness to prepare, then you'll be ready to win when the opportunity comes. And the other thing, and I heard a coach say this one time, and this really surprised me. It didn't, well, maybe I shouldn't say surprised me. It just kind of made an impact on me because he said, don't ever be satisfied. He said, you can feel good about what you do, and sometimes you do some big things, and you can feel good about that. But don't ever be satisfied. because you can do more than you did. You are capable of doing more than you did. And that's always stuck with me. As I said, not in my wildest dreams did I expect to have the opportunity that I had to go 40 years and have my long-range goal change as the way it did and to be the thing that I so enjoyed doing. One other story as I wrap this up. You make a lot of friends in this business. Some of them are on the other side of the court or the other side of the field. You have great respect for them. That doesn't mean you have to like them, but you have great respect for them and what they have done. And it's terrific to compete against them. You make a lot of friends in this business with people that maybe you don't see as often as you like or that you haven't competed against. One of my good friends in this state who's been a remarkable football coach up at Appalachian State is Jerry Moore. Jerry Moore won 3 straight national championships with Appalachian State in 2005, 2006, and 2007. His last game, or the last national championship he won over in Chattanooga, was a very impressive win over a very good team out of Delaware in the football championship division. And Jerry had a number of guys who had played with him when he played at Baylor to come and enjoy that game. And he had a number of the guys he had coached when he was the head coach at Texas Tech before coming to Boone and Appalachian State come to that game. So Jerry later told me, he said, we were excited after the game, and I was trying to see as many of those guys as I could and so forth. And he said, Delaware, it was an 8 o'clock TV game out of Chattanooga, so you know those games. They don't end until about 11:30. He said, so it was 12:15 before we got into the media room to even talk about what we had done. And he said, then after we got out of that, he said, I wanted to go celebrate with some of these guys that had come a long ways to see us play. He said, so it must have been 2 o'clock when Margaret and I got up into our hotel room that night. He said, I was so tired. He said, I flopped down in the chair over in the corner of the room. He said, I could hardly lean down and start to untie my shoes. And he said, I looked up and Margaret was putting her things aside, and I said to her, Margaret, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think I would win 3 national championships? He said, Margaret turned around and looked at me and said, Jerry, you're not even in my wildest dreams. Thank you very much.